in agriculture in general, it's just labor's getting shorter. But yet farmers are going to have to produce more. So, if the guy could only raise 500 head of cattle in the past, he's, having to increase his operation just to kind of keep it going. Because, if you're not growing, you're going backwards, it seems like, as everybody else grows around you. So one of the ways that works at making it a little bit more efficient, is putting them under, maybe a hoop shed or something like that. But one of the best ways I've seen it so far is a deep pit containment system.
Welcome to the Beef Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Brandy Buzzard, and it's my pleasure to bring you the trending issues and topics with the best and brightest minds of the beef industry. Today we are joined by Matthew Schutte, Technical Service Representative at the Healthy Farms by Bioverse, where he helps his clients find solutions for farming operations such as manure remediation, animal health, or crop production. He earned his bachelor's in agronomy and master's in crop production, both from South Dakota State University, before joining Bioverse in 2016. We're excited to talk with him today about all things of manure containment and management and helping growers solve problems with their manure systems. So thank you for being here, Matthew. We appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
To start off with, I know I covered a very, very small portion of your bio, but can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the beef and cattle industry and kind of your career path so far? Like what brought you to Bioverse and your role in here?
I was born and raised in Rushmore, Minnesota, corn and soybeans, but we also had cattle when I was growing up. Kind of got out of that, I think it was like 2007 or 2012 when corn hit $7. It was a little bit more profitable to sell corn rather than feeding it. So at that time, then I went to college, got an undergrad, got a master's, wanted to work around, the home area, still be on the farm, but yet still, have a job off the farm. And that's where Bioverse came into play. Interviewed with them, really liked what they did. And just been working with them ever since. And what they really do is that they work with manure. A big part of that is in the swine side with deep pit barns there. But we have been getting a lot more into cattle more and more just because the market has been going in that direction with deep pit cattle barns and such like that. So
we have a time and labor saving product for you. Beef and Dairy Agri-Slat by Healthy Farms is your solution. No more lugging jugs around the barn every month. With Beef and Dairy Agri-Slat, you simply drop the slat through the floor twice a year, and it works to break down solids, reduces crusting and forming. To learn more, visit myhealthyfarms.com.
Okay, so when you say deep pit cattle barns, I have to admit, I know a little bit about deep pit with like in the hog arena. My husband is full-time employed in the swine industry. So I have and I did my master's on swine research. So I have like a small bit here. But deep pit cattle barns is not something that I have any familiarity with. So, maybe you could just, bring us up to speed on that, what that means and kind of how that, what that is around your area there.
Well, yeah, one thing that's interesting with deep pit cattle barns is there's really, no one way to go about it, I guess. When you look at a swine barn, it seems it's very common to have 1,200 head over an 8-foot deep pit, and you pump it out once a year in the fall. When it comes to deep pit cattle barns, I've seen all the way from, 8-foot deep pit where they retrofitted a swine barn to be into a cattle barn, all the way to being a 14-foot deep pit, and, they finish cattle on it.
Wow.
So there's really, no one way that these barns are designed. But there is a common challenge with it where when you look at a swine manure, it's a lot more liquidy, easier to pump out in most regards. I mean, there still is plenty of other challenges. But with cattle, one of the biggest issues is that it's a little bit drier, or quite a bit drier in some cases, and, a lot more fibrous. So you have a little bit troubles in the bacteria breaking that fiber down and having something that can be easy to pump out. So there can be a lot of challenges with solids and crusting in a deep pit cattle barn. And but there's a lot of push for that. In our area especially, there's a lot of guys that are building them. One of the things that it saves on is time, not having to do say with a bed pack barn, having to clean pens, put more corn stalks out, such like that. Saves a lot of time in that regard. Also, in the manure value itself, because you can keep that in a liquid solution typically, and then inject that directly into the ground, you get to retain a lot more of that nitrogen before it might volatilize into the air. Because say if you spread dry manure out, there's a good chance that you're losing a good amount of that nitrogen before you can dig it in. Because a lot of studies show you can lose, quite a bit of the nitrogen within the first hour after spreading it, but also within the first, 24 hours especially. So that's one thing that a deep pit manure barn with a liquid solution has the advantage there, where you get a little bit more manure value for it.
So you're talking about, like pumping them out. So my first question is, how often with like an 8-foot pit are you going to pump that out? Like you said, with hogs, it might be one time a year, but as cattle, is that like, if you got them in there year round, is it like a 2 or 3 time a year? Like kind of how does that work? And then I have another question after you answer that.
Oh yeah. So typically in the cattle barn, 8 foot, isn't too crazy common. The industry standard was 12 foot for a long time. I seem to see a bit more of it going to 14 foot just because, sometimes it gets a little tight with capacity with 12 foot. And typically, yeah, you want to just pump it in the fall and that's it. But we do see guys where they have that in both fall and spring. I don't think the guys that are doing it in the spring really would like to be doing it in the spring, just because, spring, there's a ton of work. Adding one more job to do can kind of make it a little bit messy and, delay planting or just, slow things down. While in the fall, that's typically when we want to do it. And that's why more guys are kind of going into the larger pits, especially because, like I said, that cow manure can be a little bit drier. I see guys where they have gutters on these cattle barns and they'll actually feed them directly into the cattle pits. But
Okay.
past couple of years has been kind of below average for rainfall, above average for heat. And we're seeing a little bit of dryness in there. So we have guys that are actually, hauling water to put into their cattle pits so that it can be a lot easier to stir up and pump out. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to pump out a pretty dry cattle barn. So
Yeah, that's not something that I imagine has been dealt with a lot in the past. Just these past 2 years specifically, I feel like our heat has been so intense, really nationwide. You kind of touched on a little bit, like down here in where I live in Southeast Kansas, we are probably, I hopefully, quickly approaching mud season. And mud season for us is kind of like hopefully mid-September, late September, basically through March. That's mud season for us. And so I imagine, about that. And how does the climate in Minnesota affect this? So like, can they pump out like all this on frozen ground? Does it have to be certainly certain days that they can do this? I'm not from a background where we fertilize using like large amounts of, from pit, deep cattle pit. So just like, how does that work? And then if they pump it out, are they able to store it? I guess I'm very new to all this, and I'm really interested in hearing, how this works. Because as you know, beef production is very different from coast to coast and all through the Midwest.
yeah. So one thing that's kind of affecting our fall applications is, we're starting to get a little bit more regulations when it comes to manure application in fields. I've seen that in swine side, or at least I'm hearing more about it. But it's probably going to affect the beef side too, where application, or it already does affect the beef side, but application, typically they want to have that done when the soil temperature is below 50 degrees. But you want to actually have it in the soil, which has to be done before it's 32 degrees. Well, the problem with Minnesota is we can go from 80-degree, 90-degree weather to almost freezing pretty quick. So fall weather, you might have a week or two in that window. You might have a month and a half. You just don't know how long you're going to be able to go and apply that. So that's why we sometimes like to be on the earlier side. Around here, we're chopping silage right now, actually. So guys will be applying manure pretty quick. That soil temperature is way above 50 degrees, but you got to get it done. You got to get it hauled out. If you wait any longer, you just don't know what the weather's going to do. I mean, it can change at the drop of a hat. I mean, we
Right.
just had a high of 90 plus degrees. While I think within the next week, we're going to have a high of 70. with a low approaching freezing almost. So it's going to be pretty important to get that out there because it might be warm now, but winter is coming. So
We need that like menacing Game of Thrones background music with the winter is coming. And I imagine you feel that much more severely in Minnesota than we do down here in Kansas. As I was reading up a little bit, I was preparing to talk to you and reading about this. I saw this term somewhere, and so I'm going to say that, and I'm hoping that you will draw a visual for our audience when I say this term. So, pit foaming.
yeah, in cattle barns it doesn't happen too crazy often. I've seen it twice. While in like swine barns, I've gotten hundreds of calls about pit foaming. While in cattle, it's happened twice that I've done it. The first one was a guy that he was feeding. He had kind of the barn overstocked with Holsteins, and he was trying to feed once a day, and a lot of it was overflowing into the pit. He had a 12-foot deep pit, and there was feed above the slats. It was that deep with spilled feed. So that was going to be a major issue going into fall, having all that feed there. So we went and inoculated it with some of our product, and it inoculated and broke it down so fast that there was so much activity happening that, it started foaming. Essentially, it was kind of, like beer foam, but imagine a lot thicker and stickier and just nastier in every regard.
Yeah.
And yeah. And he wasn't very happy about it, but yeah, the manure pumpers that I was working with, they said that was the best they've ever pumped that barn down when that all happened. So there was a silver lining in that regard. In the end, we got what we wanted, but yeah, it wasn't fun having all that foam while that feed was breaking down. The second one was actually an aerator. They had an aeration setup, and great idea, and it worked very well for getting some oxygen into that manure. Helps reduce odor by having that oxygen in there, and also just makes breakdown happen that much better too. So just including that amount of oxygen in there, but something must have went goofy, and he just started having foaming like crazy. So he had to change a lot of things. Just to try to get that under control. And I believe he actually ended up, getting it under control. But for a while there was nothing stopping it. So, but typically in swine manure, what happens there is you get methanogen or methane producing bacteria that are going nuts and producing a lot of methane. And that can be a very dangerous situation where if that methane releases and gets catched on fire, either by a pilot light or something like that, you can have a flash fire or an explosion in these hog barns. So that isn't very uncommon. I hear about, one or two every year at least. While, I also get, like I said, hundreds of calls every year about foaming manure barns. So
You're just hundreds of foaming manure barns.
yeah.
Doesn't sound like something that I would like to have in my job description. So appreciate you heading that up for so many people. In many parts of the country, having cattle like in like an indoor barn, like what you're speaking about, is not as prevalent, due to climate and due to the, amount of the rainfall and stuff like that. You're in Minnesota. Do you see with, with just trends, do you see that may be expanding across the country? You say you talk to hundreds of producers every year. Are you seeing more indoor like cattle management systems happening, or in your experience is that kind of staying the same?
Well, yeah, just, having those open lots, that can be just kind of a lot of work, I guess. What you see in agriculture in general is just labor's getting shorter. But yet farmers are going to have to produce more. So, if the guy could only raise 500 head of cattle in the past, he's, having to increase his operation just to kind of keep it going. Because, if you're not growing, you're going backwards, it seems like, as everybody else grows around you. So one of the ways that works at making it a little bit more efficient, is putting them under, maybe a hoop shed or something like that. But one of the best ways I've seen it so far is a deep pit containment system. I got a friend that I talk to, and every time I talk to him, we talk for, hours sometimes. and he's hauling crap all day, every day. It seems like, so. And we go back and forth about difference between a deep pit containment system versus a hoop shed barn. And the biggest thing is cost. I mean, it costs. I think for him, he said it costs almost twice as much to have a deep pit containment barn, if not more, per head space. While he had open lot system, and he said he would way rather just have way more cattle under hoop shed than have an open lot in general. Now he's on a flat piece of dirt, so it's a little bit easier. I've seen some guys where they have open lot systems, but they got a lot of slope. Makes it work very well for them. But around here, we're pretty flat, or at least for the most part. So having those under a hoop shed can really help. Plus, when these heat waves go around, those are the cattle that stay on feed the best. It seems like under the hoop shed. So yeah, or at least that's what I've been told. So.
Well, I mean, that makes sense if they're not being out in the sunlight for, however many hours a day. And like, down here, it's triple digit heat. You're saying, you've had mid to high 90-degree up there in Minnesota. Like, that makes total sense that those cattle, they're going to be under that shade, are going to perform better, are going to want to stay on feed. You did your master's on crop production, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Like in South Dakota?
Yep.
So I'm curious, like, we're seeing these extended droughts for, every year there's always a region of the United States that's in a drought. That's not a new development, but it seems to be a little bit more widespread this year. Like, from your experience working with crops, and I know that you've done some consulting with people about like farming, row crop, and things like that, is kind of what do you see the future going to in that area? I mean, are we going to have more development of drought resistant, strains of different crops? I mean, I know that like we planted a drought resistant sorghum this year, forage sorghum. Are we going to see more of those kinds of developments with other row crops? Like, I'm just curious. You have the background on both the livestock and the crop here, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
you know interested in your thoughts on those things.
Yeah. And, we're starting to see different variety of crop systems. Used to be, corn, soybeans was pretty much it. But we're starting to see guys branch out into other stuff. Had one cattle grower where, he's doing more no-till on some of his drier ground, lighter ground. So, yeah, he did some ryegrass and then chopped that for silage and then doubled that up with some sorghum sudan grass and, chopped that as well. So kind of going into different options because, yeah, around here, I mean, it's usually corn or soybeans or nothing else really. But starting to see guys expand out from that. But yeah, in general, I mean, what we've noticed too is, hybrids are going longer day. Drought protection or having a hybrid that's more for drought is been almost a requirement, at least the past few years. And then irrigation. We don't have a whole lot of irrigation around here because, a lot of guys joke and say that we're in God's country, but yeah, it seems like we, get our 30 plus inches of rain. We got our heavy black dirt that keeps it around. And the biggest thing for us was tile to get rid of water. But it seems like, a lot more people are talking about irrigation to get that water to come back, at least on some of this marginal ground that still goes for, nearly, $10,000 an acre in our area. So, you got to try and, say if you got a quarter or a couple quarters that are in tough ground and you're always, 50 to 100 bushels behind on some of that other, good dirt. I've seen guys put irrigation up and all of a sudden they're doing 50 bushel better than guys with good dirt are doing. So, it's a pretty big deal to go from producing 150 bushel corn to 250 plus. So,
That's huge. Absolutely huge.
Wow. Before we never had to worry about irrigation. So,
Yeah, it's been a stark difference here course of the last few years, really, in terms of moisture across the country.
mm-hmm.
In terms of different feed stuffs and feed rations, and circling back to the pit foaming, like, does what the cattle eat have any effect on how the inoculant that Bioverse uses? Like, does it have any effect on how that reacts with it, or is it by the time it reaches that stage of its digestion, for lack of a better word, is it really is it irrelevant by that time?
Yeah, no, it can be pretty important. I mean, there's some beef growers that will have direct fed microbials or biologicals added to their rations, and that can help digest the solids better before it gets to the back end and gets into the pit. And then also just depends on how much roughage you have. The less roughage you have, the better off you can be as far as the liquidity in that manure. But overall, I mean, we try to, manure isn't going to change too crazy much. There's only a few instances, mostly in the swine side. I remember in 2020 and COVID, we had a huge amount of crusting in swine pits that summer because there was guys that were feeding a lot of fiber to their pigs just to slow them down because of all the plants that were shut down.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Um, on the cattle side, haven't seen any huge swings like that. I guess between each pit, but you can still still is good to talk to the grower, listen to them, and see what kind of challenges they're going through with each pit, and see what we can do to fix that issue. So.
That's interesting. Well, when you aren't working and helping other producers with their pit foaming or, consulting about different manure management or crop production things, what are you filling your time with in terms of hobbies? Do you have time for any hobbies?
Well, I got a couple other businesses that I do. I have a seed and chemical business on the side. That's kind of the reason why, um, I work more on a consultant basis with Bioverse. I still have plenty of time to answer any calls that growers have. But also have pumpkins and such like that. We're actually going to be setting up roadside stands for pumpkins this coming week. Yeah, we grow 4 acres of those, so we're hitting the season for that now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You fix it to be Mach 9 with pumpkins.
yeah. So yeah, we picked quite a few of them. So and it's not been a bad year. I was kind of worried that it was going to be a little tough with the heat and the dryness and all that, but honestly, they look pretty good. So.
So you were not expecting to get these questions when you came on here today, but I have some legitimate pumpkin questions today. So I hope that you'll entertain, that you'll bear with me. I did not get my pumpkins off the porch last year in a timely fashion, and they
Hmm.
kind of like turned to goo, and then they started growing out of my flower beds this fall. So I have these pumpkin vines coming off my porch, and my question is, how do I know? One question is, how do I know when the pumpkins are done? Like
Hmm.
when they have reached, when they're done growing, and then when can I stop watering them? Because like it's in about 10 days, it's going to be low 80s is the high here, will be the high here. And that for me will be my sign like fall is here. I'll be excited.
Oh.
I will have decided that fall is here and I'll be ready. So how do you know when a pumpkin is ready to pick, and do I need to keep watering them right now?
Well, as soon as the pumpkin starts to turn orange, it's pretty much done for the most part. You could cut it off of the vine and everything at that point, even if it's just a speck of orange. We don't do that just because sometimes they can finish a little funny because there's still plenty of moisture in there and they might not set up the right way, I guess, or they might look a little funnier. But yeah, as soon as they turn orange, yeah, you can pretty much, yeah, they're pretty much done at that point. But the ones closest to the main stem will probably mature a lot faster or earlier than the ones on the edge. So you can kind of keep them going. I mean, we get new pumpkins all the way into October, but usually they don't finish or they get frozen or something like that. So, I mean, you can keep it going as long as you want, but yeah, um, just keep growing them until you don't want any more pumpkins. So,
Okay, so I think that these were ornamental pumpkins, maybe that I had not thrown. I had a whole bunch of them, and I just
oh,
took me a long time to some. So on one vine is a normal looking orange, like I'll call it a jack-o'-lantern pumpkin.
yep.
I don't know what that's actually called, but I swear on the same vine, it maybe it's a different vine, but they're all like intertwined. Are like these orange and yellow striped ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I can pick the orange one from what you're telling me because it's like a larger one. But then the smaller ones that are orange and yellow, like striped, do I just call it good?
Yeah, you
I'm
probably
sorry.
could.
I'm
Yeah, if
sorry
it
to put you on the
looks
pumpkin spot
no,
here.
yeah, no, if it kind of looks like what it's supposed to be, but that's kind of thing with pumpkins too. People ask me why we don't just replant the pumpkins that we have. Well, pumpkins will produce uh, the fruit in the same color as what the seed is supposed to. So say you want a 25-pound jack-o'-lantern orange pumpkin, okay? Well, it'll look like a 25-pound orange jack-o'-lantern pumpkin, but if you say you got some 50-pound white pumpkins, you got some yellow pumpkins, blue ones, whatever, that pollen's just kind of going around pollinating whatever female flower there is. So the seeds inside that 25-pound pumpkin could be, a 50-pound white, could be 20-pound yellow, it could
Oh,
be, so it could be a surprise seed. But if it was grown in an area, say you got a 20-acre swath of 25-pound jack-o'-lantern pumpkins, it's going to be pretty unlikely that, you're going to have a lot of cross contamination or whatever you want to call it. So, but our pumpkins, we got only 4 acres and we got like 40 different hybrids in there. So if we planted the pumpkins that, we got from last year, the leftovers, we would have a wild variety, I bet. So, yeah.
so the pumpkins on the vines, if I left them on the porch right now, I could have some random orange, like they could look very different next year
Yeah, they
because
could
I've got.
cross pollinate with each other and such like that. So,
That's
yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I know that you weren't planning to talk about pumpkins and you came on today to talk about cattle
No, that's
production.
right. Yeah.
I was just watering them this morning and that was perfect. So, well, thanks for sharing that little, that side of your life with us. That's really all the questions that we've got today, talking about the pit foaming and the deep pit raising cattle in that manner. Is there anything that you want to share more about you know, in that respect or that area that I just completely missed and didn't bring up?
No, yeah, I kind of think that's about it, I suppose. So I
Yeah.
can't think of anything off
Well,
the top of my head.
okay.
It's time for our famous three.
Well, we ask these last three questions to every member or every guest that comes on the podcast. And so I gave you a little bit of heads up on these, not a lot, but a little bit. So hopefully that have been enough. But the first one is, what is your favorite beef or cattle related book or resource?
Um, my favorite thing is just talking to people that are in the industry. I mean, they kind of know the most. I got a friend that feeds cattle. I got a lot of customers that do too. So, if I got a question about it, I'll just ask them, I guess. Otherwise, if I'm looking for something a little official or whatever, I'll just check out university extensions as well too. So,
It's great. That is kind of a consistent question, a consistent answer, honestly, that I get more often than not. Like the local extension website, or like the local, like an extension booklet comes up quite often. So that's a common thread. All right. So the next one is what is a book that is not related to beef or cattle that you are currently reading?
I guess, mostly read, fiction books for entertainment, but otherwise, yeah, I just like to anything I can learn, I guess. I mean, university websites, about pumpkins or strawberries or whatever, or corn. I don't know. I just like learning about that kind of stuff and anything that's kind of new and catches my curiosity, I suppose. So, I mean, it can even be Wikipedia for all I know. I can usually spend an hour on there just clicking on random stuff and learning random things. So, yeah.
Yeah, you can really go down the rabbit hole on Wikipedia. Do you
Yeah.
grow strawberries too?
Yeah. Yeah. We have pick your own strawberries and raspberries as well. So,
Oh my
yeah.
gosh. We we're gonna have to end this because I would just talk your ear off about like I love the idea of having like an orchard or like a like a pick your own kind of place, and year round you're just always hosting new people. I think that's amazing. So that's very cool. Okay, and this last question we ask of everybody: when you think of someone that you look up to or admire, what is a trait they have that has enabled them to be successful?
Kind of big one is passion or something like, one of the biggest things that attracted me to Bioverse was one of the owners. He's in his 80s, but, you talk to him, he's as excited as a 20-year-old college student learning about something new. He's a curious guy. But yeah, he's just very passionate about what he wants to do. And, I've seen a lot of people that are in their 60 plus years old where they kind of, I'm old. I don't really need to learn anything new. I'm kind of set in my ways, but, this guy, he's always learning something new. He's always actively engaging, asking tons of questions, and just a very enjoyable guy to be around, but, guy that I look up to for anything. So,
Yeah, that's so true. Passion can take you such a long ways. a long way in your career or in hobbies, even just having that passion and that drive can keep you going for the long haul. So thank you for sharing those little pieces of fun information with us. That is all the time that we have for today. I want to thank you, Matthew, for joining us here on the Beef Podcast Show. If people want to find out more about you or your work with Bioverse or your like your consulting or your seed business or the pumpkins or the you pick strawberries, if people want to learn more about you, how can they do that? Where can they go?
Well, yeah, they can go to the Bioverse website, Healthy Farms by Bioverse. And just contact us at our phone and ask for me, or any of the agricultural lines will also lead to me too. So otherwise,
Okay.
however way they want to get in contact with me. Otherwise, my email is mschutte@bioverse.com.
Okay. Well, I'm going to put those in the show notes. So, listeners, if you are wanting to get a hold of Matthew, you can check the show notes for the Bioverse website and then also his email there. So, thank you so much again, Matthew, for joining us and sharing this perspective with us. As we know, beef production is different in every single state. And so, it's really interesting to learn more about how different regions do that. So thank you again for joining us. And those who are listening on our audience, thank you for joining us and tuning in. And we hope you will join us again next week on the Beef Podcast.